Okay, tonight is part 4 on grieving, and then next week will be the final night on grieving. And I said tonight I wanted to give you part 2 of practical tools that you need to understand as far as learning to grieve in a healthy way. Before we get into the practical things, I thought I would do just a couple pieces as introduction, just to help you have some extra information around grieving. If you're new in recovery, you've probably heard somebody say grieving their addiction. And many treatment centers will have you write a letter to your drug or your addiction and say goodbye to it. And what I have found with a lot of people is that when they first come into recovery, they go, "What do you mean, grieve my addiction? I'm done with addiction. I hate my addiction." All of that kind of talk. What many find after several months is they start to miss their addiction. And that's what we mean when we talk about grieving your addiction. So let me give you some of the parts or pieces that are part of grieving your addiction, or the losses that you will go through as a result of being clean and sober. So number 1, for some of you, being clean and sober, if you're going to stay that way, you're going to have to say goodbye to your family, or you're going to have to set very clear boundaries with your family, because they aren't good for your sobriety. They are either too toxic, or they just trigger you too much, or they don't respect your boundaries enough that you have to really pull away from them. And many people find that very difficult to do. So that's one of the things that being clean and sober will involve for some people, is losing their family in their life for a little while or for a long time. Second thing, you may have to say goodbye to many of your friends, some who are still in the problem, and for you to hang around them is not good for you in your sobriety. And what is one of the hardest things to do is you might have been in a relationship in the problem, and you have come out now into recovery, but they're still in the problem. And you might try and help them for a while, but you might discover that they just keep dragging you back into the problem. And so a lot of people have to end a relationship, and that is super hard to do. So you're grieving the loss of a relationship, and it's all part of getting clean and sober and staying that way. Next one. There will probably come a time when you will grieve or miss the high of being in the problem. There's something that calls to you. There will be those memories that come back into your mind that make you kind of long or crave for the high again. And so that is one of the things that you have to grieve. And then many people out of complex trauma, they have this love-hate relationship with chaos. Part of what happens in recovery is, as you're growing and doing work on yourself and starting to get healthy, life starts to go smoothly. And for many of you, that feels boring. And so something in you gets triggered to want chaos again, because you begin to think you need it, you're missing it. That will spice up your boring life. And so part of recovery is letting go of drama and chaos and all of the parts of the lifestyle that fed the drama and the chaos. Next one, and this is probably the biggest one, is for most people at the end, the drug was the enemy. But for many years, it was your best friend. It was what enabled you to cope. It was what enabled you to numb out your problems, escape from your problems. And so now, to get clean and sober, you have to say goodbye to what was your greatest favorite way of coping. And that will require grieving, because that is a huge loss for many people. Another part of that is recovery means feeling emotions. And so part of what you are triggered when you start to feel painful emotions is you want to numb. You don't want to feel that stuff. It's too uncomfortable. And so part of you has to grieve the old ways of numbing and learn to start to feel stuff again. And then many people don't realize it when they come into recovery, but one of the things they liked about being in the problem was they could kind of be irresponsible and do whatever they want, nobody making them accountable. Recovery requires becoming responsible, and that requires hard work, accountability, doing stuff when you don't feel like doing it. And so sometimes you have to grieve part of that lifestyle of being irresponsible. And then another one, especially for young people, is realizing that I am truly an addict. The chemistry of my brain has changed. I therefore will not be able to drink socially again. And that is really hard to accept, because it feels like a great loss when your friends are able to have a few beers and quit and you can't. And so you grieve that. And then the final one, many people in the problem develop an identity, an image. You are either that intimidating person, or you were the greatest drunk in the world and people respected you, that you could drink more than anybody, or you were this flirtatious personality in the problem. All the guys liked you, everybody was attracted to you, and now that you're clean and sober, you go, who am I? And then I feel maybe I'm not going to be a whole lot of fun. Maybe nobody's going to want to hang around with me. And something in you wants to go back to that image from being in the problem. And that is something you have to lose, to let go of. And so there's a whole bunch of different things many people have to grieve once they come into recovery. Now there's a second thing I want to talk about. If you have lost somebody close to you, last week we looked at a process that you will go through as you begin to grieve that loss. What I didn't cover, and I just want to go through quickly, is there could be some things that happen in the grieving process that kind of shock you or surprise you. Number one, you might feel very guilty that you're the one that's alive and they're dead. We call that survivor's guilt. And many of you have struggled with that. Especially if there's been an accident, you live, they die. Or if there was a suicide and you're still alive and they didn't make it. That can really mess you up. And so often for many people as they grieve, they got to deal with this guilty feeling that they have for being alive or having a good life. So if you've gone through that or you're going through that, I would encourage you to get help in getting through that. The next thing that can kind of shock you is one day you might just pick up your phone and start to dial, and then you go, oh, they're dead. But almost out of a habit, you just, without even thinking about it, pick up your phone to talk to them. It's just an instinct. That happens. So you're not going crazy. That's just part of what takes place as you go through the grieving process. Next thing, you could be walking down Portage or you could be at Polo Park, and all of a sudden you think you see them. You see them in the crowd and you want to rush up there and then you go, they're dead. But your brain plays these tricks on you, it seems, where you're looking and you think you see them. That's very normal as well. Then you could have dreams that are very real, very vivid, that could really kind of mess you up and make you feel all kinds of powerful emotions, that's normal too. That doesn't mean you're losing it. And then many people find after a couple years, they're through the grieving process, they start to move on, but something stops them. And it's they just can't get rid of all of the stuff that belonged to the other person. Now, it's okay to keep certain things as reminders of them, keepsakes that are special, but when a person can't get rid of anything, so they can't change their bedroom around, they can't get rid of any of the clothes in the closet, that can be a problem. There's something that you probably will need some help with there to get through that. And then some people still find their brain almost goes to a escape through fantasy place where instead of thinking the person has died and is gone, they still say they're off on a holiday or on a business trip. That can be a normal thing. If it goes on for too long and you're consciously doing it, then you probably need some help in dealing with that as well. So those are just two things at the beginning to kind of fill in your understanding of this whole grieving and healthy grieving stuff. Now tonight, for the rest of the time, I want to look at practical guidelines. So last week, as I said, we looked at the process or stages of grieving that people go through. Now this tonight is just some practical observation, extra tools that might be helpful for you. So number one, the only way through grief is to grieve. Now the reason I say that is because every good addict I know says there's got to be a shortcut somewhere. If I just look hard enough, I can find a way through grief that doesn't require grieving. There's some magic pill, there's some quick fix, all of that, I gotta just find it. No, there's not. The only way through grieving is you gotta go through it. And that leads to the second one, is you can't bury it, you can't hurry it up. It takes time. As I've said over the last couple weeks, for people very close to you, it can take 2 to 3 years. What many have found, and people have shared with me as I've done this series, is they realize that they lost somebody 20, 30, 40 years ago. They've never dealt with it, and they're starting to feel it now. It's hitting them. And I've talked with other people who've dealt with stuff, but 10 years later, things still can trigger it, and they can find themselves crying all over again. So grieving is a process. It does take time, but even after the 2 or 3 years, those are the kind of the main grieving years. After that, you may get memories and flashbacks and heavier moments, but it won't be nearly as intense as that initial time through the stages of grieving. The next one is really critical. Everybody grieves uniquely. When I was in Ontario, my brother, who I told you about, who lost his son a year ago to a brain aneurysm, he happened to be in Ontario visiting or working, so he popped over to spend some time with me. And he said this to me. He went to a counselor because he thought he was doing grieving wrong, because he was grieving very differently from his wife. And his wife was crying every day for hours. And she would break into tears. And after a few months, he would cry maybe a couple times a week, but not every day and not with that intensity. And he was starting to doubt himself that maybe he had something wrong with him. And he went to a counselor and he was kind of disappointed because the counselor said, "No, I don't see anything wrong with what you're doing. See you later." But what he needed to hear was, every person grieves differently. Now this is really important if you're in a relationship. Because The research says that over 75% of relationships break up after losing somebody close because you grieve so differently. And so you begin to think and have conflict because you think your partner isn't doing it right or doesn't care as much or is too cold-hearted or all of those things. And it can cause a lot of tension and conflict. So let me just give you a couple examples. And I take this from my own marriage, but if I'm grieving, I get very quiet. If my wife is grieving, she never stops talking. She's got to talk it all out over and over and over again. And I just want to be quiet, alone with my thoughts. So you can see how that could cause problems. Number one, I can get very tired of listening to her. Number two, she doesn't think I have any emotions. I'm a dead fish. What's the matter with you? Don't you care? All of those things can happen. And then, when I'm going through grief, I feel my emotions and I put them into words on occasion. And it's a very internal process that takes place as I process my emotions, my grief. My wife is very expressive of her emotions. I am very internalized with my emotions. It's not that my way's right and hers is wrong, it's just we're different. And so part of grieving is accepting that your partner is grieving just as much as you, but in a different way. And then, when I'm grieving, I like being alone. I need to be alone. My wife likes being surrounded by people. And so that can cause problems because she wants people popping in to visit her and I want to be by myself. And I don't want anybody popping in. So you got tension, potentially, that comes because people grieve in a different way. So it's important if you are in a relationship to be able to understand that, but then to be able to talk about the differences in your style so that you can come to accept it. Okay, next practical guideline. Please, if you're grieving, reach out for help. You can't do it alone. In the first talk, I told you about research that was done about people that grieve well. They don't need any help, so they're not at risk. Those that need a bit of help, but they can get through, so they're called medium risk. And then there's high risk people who can't get through unless they have a lot of outside help. That high risk people are complex trauma people. And we've gone through all the bad tools that you received growing up about grieving, and so now as you face a loss, you need help. You need people who can help you process it, be there with you to support you. Now, why I emphasize that is this. One of the characteristics of complex trauma is I never want to be a burden or a pain. I felt all my life, if I have a need, I'm a burden to others. Somehow you have to get by that and begin to realize, I can't do this alone. I need to reach out for help. And so what I encourage people to do is explore some options. You may have a friend that you can talk it through with. You may need to go to a counselor. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in doing that, just to help you get on the right track, to identify things where you might be stuck, or things that you can't get your head around or work through. So a counselor can be very helpful. We have in Winnipeg quite a good number of different grief support groups. So there are groups for parents that have lost a child. There are groups for people that have gone through a divorce or a major split up. There's those different kinds of support groups that can be very helpful for a period of time. It's not like you're going to be in them forever, but they can help you get through the toughest parts of the grieving process. The next thing I encourage people to do is read books or go on the internet. There's a lot of very helpful material that will give you very helpful tools and practical advice to help you in your grieving process. Tons of that is available today. Now take it further than just talking to a friend to help you process. This next one where I say talk to others, it goes in a little different direction. As a pastor, I have done many, many funerals. And one of the things that I have learned early on in doing a funeral, if it's a person that was dearly loved, a person who was a good person genuinely, is I would meet with the family, and if I didn't know them, I would just say, tell me your best memories of this person. And they would share it. Then I'd turn to the next person, tell me your best memories. And before you know it, they would be talking over each other. Oh, you remember that, you remember that. And before you know it, the sad tears turn to happy tears. There's healing if you can reminisce, share memories with others that also have good memories. Now this gets tricky if your memories aren't good. And all you have is anger, even hate. You have zero respect for the person. They were a total jerk. You don't need to go into trying to make up memories, but you do need to have somebody you can talk to help you get through that very painful stuff. Next thing, one of the things that I've encouraged people to do over the years is this. If that person was a significant, powerful influence for good in your life, why don't you make a scrapbook or a memory book of them? You can have some pictures, you can journal and write some memories, you can do different things that will just help you process your feelings, have a memory keepsake that you can go back to later in life, and it can provide a wonderful healing for you. One of the beauties of technology today and computers is you can take old photographs and you can get them scanned and put on a computer, and you can make PowerPoint presentations and all kinds of neat things, and you can add music to it, their favorite songs, you can add words, all kinds of different things. So that's an idea, and if you haven't ever done it, but you think it might be good, I'd encourage you to do it. Many people benefit from having some kind of ritual, some kind of letting go type of ceremony. I think it's important in this sense. We are one of the few cultures in the world where we don't see death. People go to a hospital to die. Do you realize that in most cultures of the world, people come home to die with their family? So children witness death up close. They get to see and experience all of the dynamics of that. They get to see how parents and aunts and uncles and siblings process, and they learn from that. We have worked hard to insulate ourselves from loss. And therefore, it hits us later, and we don't quite know what to do about it. And so for a lot of people, it's helpful to have a ceremony, something to say goodbye. So a funeral service might help. I've had clients who've written letters, and they've gone to the graveside and read it to the grave, to the tombstone, and they sobbed, they've connected, it's been very healing. I've had others who've let balloons go. I've had people who've done smudging ceremonies or sweats as ways of connecting kind of with the whole healing community and saying goodbye. Whatever works for you. But it gives a sense of finality. It gives you the ability to say goodbye and kind of begin to move on. Next one. Most people don't realize how much emotional energy grieving takes. There's probably nothing more powerful that affects our central nervous system besides trauma than grief. It takes its toll on our central nervous system. Therefore, it is important to try to have good self-care. Now, in the early days, you can't sleep. In the early days, you're kind of shocked. You don't feel hungry. That's fine. But once you get moving after the first week or so, you need to begin to try and get good rest. Try to stay in a bit of a routine. Try to eat well. That will help you deal with the stress on your central nervous system. And you might need some help in doing that. You might need somebody in your life to just check up on you in that area, because it's really easy to slide into, oh, I don't feel like eating today, or I'll just eat junk food today, or stay up half the night, and before you know it, you're struggling physically, which makes you struggle even more in grieving the loss that you're going through. Part of all of that is be kind to yourself. Addicts tend to be perfectionists. And so they go into grieving, say, I got to do this perfectly. You're not going to probably do it perfectly. Give yourself some kindness. This is a learning experience for you. Let yourself make some mistakes and learn from them. Many others think if I'm grieving, then I'm going to kind of have more and more good days and soon never have a bad day. No, you're still going to have some bad days. Let yourself have those. But be kind to yourself. Don't be beating yourself up that you're not grieving well enough. Next one. Validate your loss. What we saw in complex trauma is loss was often minimized. It was get over it, don't make such a big deal out of it. So one of the things that some people find helpful is to actually name the loss. We had a client, and when he lost something, he said in front of all the other clients, today I have lost this. He put it into words. And it was amazing to watch. It just seemed to help him put it in perspective, get focused, even took a bit of a weight off because he identified what he was feeling. He identified the loss. He identified how much he was hurting. And he put it all into words. He named it. So that is very helpful. Some people find it okay to do that verbally. Others do that by journaling. And they put it into writing, and that's very important. Next one is super important, but very difficult. Grieving, you need to have good boundaries. Now here's a whole bunch of things that you're going to have to deal with. Number one, it's weird that when a person's grieving, everybody seems to know or think they know what's best for them. So they will phone you 50 times a day, pop over uninvited, bring you food, all of those things because they think they know what's best for you. They don't. Oftentimes they don't. And so while you're grieving, there will be a lot of very annoying people that want to push into your life. And so you're going to need to be able to tell people what you need. And if they think they know what you need and you know you don't need that, then you have to say, no, please don't. And many don't like to do that. They feel, I might hurt their feelings. I don't want to upset them. And it's very difficult for them. But if you don't, pretty soon you are not going to have any space. And you're going to get a resentment and very angry at these annoying people. Some people will want to drop in on you. Some people will try to get you talking. Some people will try to tell you how you should feel. Others will minimize your loss and give you cliches. So boundaries are very important. And I would say when you're grieving, boundaries might be important, more important than almost any other time. It is so important to have that in your life. Next one, telling people what you need means. Do you want them to visit you? Do you want them to phone you? Do you want them to bring you food? And do you want them to give you a hug? A lot of people will come up to you assuming you want a hug, and that's the last thing you want. It's okay to say, I don't want a hug. Next one is a tricky one. If you have children, you might have to put your grieving on hold during parts of the day. So you might have children that you need to give your attention to. They've got their own grief they're going through. They got their own problem. So you have to be the adult and put your grieving on hold. And then once the kids are gone to bed or you get a bit of alone time, you can bring it out and grieve. So it is possible to compartmentalize a little bit healthy grieving. Putting it on a back burner so you can deal with the rest of life, bringing it back out and dealing with it. That doesn't mean you're avoiding, that doesn't mean you're stuffing. It just means you're trying to grieve but still maintain your responsibilities in life. And then the final one. Part of complex trauma is I have to do everything 110%. And so many people approach grieving that way. I now am going to grieve night and day, 110% till it's done. Your central nervous system can't handle that. So part of taking care of yourself is taking a break once in a while and say, you know what? I think I need tonight to just watch a movie and chill. That doesn't mean you're avoiding. That doesn't mean you're stuffing. It means you're just trying to be balanced. So be able to take a break once in a while from grieving. Okay, try to maintain a routine as much as possible. So important, especially for addicts. Secondly, deal with any guilt you might have. Guilt will just keep you stuck if you don't deal with it. Next one, prepare for loneliness. So if you know a holiday is coming up, a birthday's coming up, you know that you'll probably feel extra lonely that day. So you can prepare for that, or you know you're going to just get overwhelming feelings. You can prepare for that. So the more you can plan ahead and be able to anticipate what's coming next on the calendar and how you might feel on those dates, the better. And then plan ahead for the grief triggers. We've mentioned that. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, all of those are important. Many people find comfort in grieving in a spiritual connection. And if that is an important part of your life, you will find a lot of comfort and healing in your grieving there. And then, grieving requires some time alone. Be careful you don't begin to isolate. That is such dangerous territory. And so you might need somebody to just check up on you that you're healthy. Withdrawing to be alone hasn't crossed over into unhealthy isolation. Because if you go to unhealthy isolation, usually it's heading towards a relapse. And then, finally, grieving in a healthy way doesn't mean you'll get to a point where you never feel the pain again. I was telling my brother this story, and he hadn't remembered it. 30 years ago, I got a phone call from my younger brother, not the one who I was visiting, but my younger brother, and he and his wife had found out about 5 years earlier that they couldn't have children, and so they went to fertility doctors, and finally she got pregnant. And we were all so happy as a family and excited for them. And then they found out it was going to be twins. And we were even more excited. And then at 6 months, she went in for a checkup and both babies were dead. And so she had to go through the natural birthing process to deliver the babies. And it was a devastating time for the whole family, but especially for my younger brother and his wife. I remember what happened a couple days after the funeral. My grandma called and asked if my brother would come and visit her. And the reason was this: 50 years earlier, she had lost a baby at birth. And so I went with my brother. We had about an 8-hour drive. And I went with my brother to visit Grandma. And as soon as we got there, Grandma came out of her apartment with tears running down her face, and all she wanted to do was hold my brother, and she said, "I understand." What that said to me was 50 years after the fact, she still remembered the pain. But 50 years after the fact, she had healed to the point that the pain was no longer a negative, paralyzing thing. It was now something that enabled her to give comfort to others because she understood. And so there's a part of grieving you never get totally over, but it changes. And it can change to become a source of great growth and then comfort to others in your life.